Our first contributor is somebody who in my former life as a newspaper editor I would have been proud to have on my team, and indeed he was for a brief while he was the Australian's New South Wales political correspondent before he moved on to the Sydney Morning Herald and the ABC, where he hosts the Religion and Ethics Report. He is, in my view, amongst Australia's finest practitioners of public sector broadcasting. He presents a show that's erudite as well as entertaining. It's challenging and considered. But most of all, you know you're going to get a guaranteed intellectual return from the investment of your time. So please join me in welcoming back to the private sector for one night only, Mr. Andrew West.
Well, that's very nice of you. Thank you. Well, thank you. I might have to revise my introduction. I am very happy to be here at the Centre for Independent Studies. I understand you did put out an invitation to the chairman of the board. You've ended up with the presenter of a half-hour weekly program on Radio National. I'm not being falsely modest if I say there's probably one or two levels between me and Jim Spiegelman. I think I probably am amongst friends, or at least respectful critics. The great British politician Tony Benn, who died just last month, and you don't have to endorse Benn's politics, by the way, to acknowledge his significance. The Queen allowed him to lie in state in Westminster, as she did with Mrs. Thatcher. He used to recall his favourite hymn, and it's often forgotten that Tony Benn had a deeply Christian upbringing. His mother was a Congregationalist lay minister, and she used to tell him, "Dare to be Daniel, dare to stand alone, dare to have a purpose firm, and dare to make it known." So here I stand before you, perhaps not alone, but certainly to make my purpose known. I want to address 3 points very briefly in my opening remarks, and no doubt we'll talk about some other things in our panel discussion. Let me begin by arguing that the greatest virtue of the ABC is to be the unique platform for the discussion and discovery that no other media can be. Now, I speak with a certain amount of self-interest, but I think a sincere conviction that this applies especially to Radio National. If I could just be indulgent and cite my own program first, where else on the Australian broadcast media would you find the following issues dealt with since the beginning of 2014? Religion as a divisive, if not a decisive factor in the current Indian elections, how the Grand Mufti of Egypt came to be in a position to decide life or death for 529 Egyptian protesters, a debate, a real debate between two very willing combatants, accorded equal time about the role of Scripture in Australian schools, a study of how religion shapes voting in Australia versus the UK, how Buenos Aires shaped the thinking of Pope Francis. In 2013, on the Religion and Ethics Report, you would have heard experts outline in neutral and very respectful terms the religious backgrounds and influences on Tony Abbott, Kevin Rudd, Julia Gillard and Christine Milne. Rupert Short, the British author, on the threat to Christians around the world. Some of the first reports in Australia about what's become a religious war between Muslims and Christians in the Central African Republic. My friend Peter Hitchens discussing what he calls the new religion of drug taking. My friend Nick Cater on whether progressivism is a new religion. The fascinating, complex, socialist, conservative, Jewish intellectual student of Catholic social teaching, Lord Maurice Glassman, argue for a new ethical basis for the Australian and British Labor parties. What I would contend was the most revealing interview with the Democratic Labor Party Senator John Madigan about his faith and how it will guide his role as a crucial crossbencher, and on how North Korea's Kim dynasty is a very weird religion in itself. On one of the Radio National's finest programs, Big Ideas, which is recording this forum tonight, so far just this year you would have heard about Stalin's paranoia and xenophobia, on whether we should welcome or limit foreign investment in agriculture, whether social media is hurting or helping science, what comes after the mining boom, and should we even try to tackle obesity. And finally, just on another of our marquee programs, Life Matters, you would have heard recent stories about critical issues such as life after foster care for wards of the state, grandparents having to return to full-time parenting, a debate involving the Centre for Independent Studies staffer Cass Wilkinson on whether we should privatise Medibank. I challenge you to find me another broadcaster in this country that will offer the same variety of subject matter in the one place. Now, it may be that you don't believe these issues are worth debating. From this crowd, I doubt that you do believe that, but if you do, it may be that you don't think they serve an immediate economic goal. Maybe they don't. But I think we need to acknowledge that's an ideological position. I'd also argue that there's really no other place other than the public broadcaster, and indeed Radio National, where great think tanks like the Centre for Independent Studies get to share their work in depth and explain their nuance. Now, this is very basic data, but I think it goes some way to illustrating my point. I went to the CIS website where the CIS posts information about its appearances in the media. Of the 6 major media appearances listed, and these are the ones that are listed so far this year, 4 have been on Radio National, and actually it's 5 because my friend the Reverend Peter Curtie's appearance on the very first Religion and Ethics report of this year isn't listed. But that's 80% so far of radio coverage for the CIS just on one network. In 2013, of the 30 major radio appearances listed on the CIS website, 15 of them, 50%, were on the ABC. And in 2012, 15 of the 28 major appearances that are listed for the CIS were on the ABC. For the Institute of Public Affairs, which wants to privatise the ABC, and that's a perfectly legitimate debate to have, from January 2013 to April 2014, it placed 73 of its 266 listed media appearances, there may be others, on the ABC, that's 28%, and a further 13 at the university-funded Conversation website. So the first point that I'm making here is that the ABC considers organisations such as the CIS and the IPA, critical as they are of the ABC, as welcome and vital partners in the national conversation that we are privileged to host. The second point goes closer to the heart of my argument. The audience for a Radio National program can be anywhere between 50,000 to 250,000. That doesn't include our unmeasured audience in rural and regional Australia, where our penetration is very significant. But okay, we don't have a huge audience, but we have an attentive audience. Now, you'll notice that I'm not running a snobbish line here that we have the smartest listeners. I grew up in a house where John Laws was a constant and welcome presence. But because the ABC isn't encumbered by cacophonous radio advertising that you get on commercial radio, we have the time and the format to dedicate to these discussions. So even if you take a highly intelligent commercial broadcaster like Alan Jones, who's genuinely interested in ideas, the format of such programming prevents an in-depth discussion. You'll have blocks of advertising lasting up to 3 minutes, the deployment of what's called in the business interruption marketing. Now, I've heard Alan Jones from time to time conducting very serious, longish interviews, but the format forces him to implore his guests to sit tight, to hold that thought while he takes an ad break. The US firm Strategic Media conducted a 10-year study of radio ads and found, quote, an inverse relationship between the production value and ad performance. And it included that perhaps good production values, that smooth advertisements that you might not find intrusive, those good production values create an ad that's so slick that it doesn't stand out. They quoted the US marketing guru Seth Goodlin as saying, "The perfect is boring." The point here is it's not to argue that commercial radio is inferior. It produced giants like John Laws and Neil Mitchell, and yes, my friend and colleague Philip Adams. But it is to suggest that commercial radio can't do what we do. and what I suspect the people in this room value, which is an in-depth exploration of news and ideas. There are also 66 million podcasts in 2013. So I think there's a demonstrable pluralism in the type of issues we cover and the people who participate. The second point I want to make in arguing the necessity of the ABC goes to its so-called live and local mandate. And again, I'll just focus on radio. The ABC operates 56 local stations around Australia. They are the lifeblood of rural and regional Australia, partly because economics has forced the once great commercial local stations to amalgamate. And with the honourable exception, I think, of the Grant family, and I'm talking here about a wonderful old-fashioned family-owned business with that community service ethic, there's no other commercial network that embraces the philosophy of live and local. Non-ABC radio in the regions has been consolidated into a handful of networks: Southern Cross, Austereo, Bill Corrales' network. Economic pressures, the return to shareholders, has forced them into what they call hubbing, with just one regional hub per state, such as Townsville or Albury-Wodonga. And this follows the US model of consolidation by companies like Clear Channel, where you can get up to 7 stations running out of one building in one city, almost entirely computerised. Back in the late 1980s, at a local commercial radio station like 2LT in Lithgow, where as a 19-year-old I applied for a job, you had announcers across every shift, including nights and weekends. Today you're lucky to get a local announcer after 1 p.m. You'll almost certainly not have any local journalists in the field covering councils or stock prices and sales, and at most you'll have an announcer providing a rip and read news service, increasingly from the local ABC website. And the last argument I want to briefly make has been made, I think, by one of the most successful news producers in commercial television, Peter Meakin. He said, "It's perfectly possible for us to do what the 7:30 report does, but I'd have to close the show in a month. Much of what the ABC does is just not marketable in commercial television." Now, I suppose if you're a market purist, you'll say, fine, if it doesn't pay, it shouldn't exist. And if that's your sincere and principled position, I think in the interests of consistency, you should also say, and I think this would jar with this educated audience, but I think you should also say that the study of arts and social sciences at universities is redundant because it produces no immediate financial return. So too astronomy, or the creation and maintenance of public parks and gardens, public libraries, the preservation of historic buildings, the Conservatorium of Music. Or you could argue that the public interest demands that something that can't necessarily pay its way, but over time adds to our active citizenship. And the active citizen deserves and needs a thorough interrogation and investigation of his or her political leaders, corporations, unions, bureaucracies, churches, charities, and underworlds. A study by Busey and Grab, published in the Journal of Communication in 2007, found that by the 2004 election cycle in the US, the average duration of a soundbite or comment was 7.73 seconds, and that was in an election year. People such as Mr. Meakin, with impeccable credentials in commercial television, I think recognise this, and that's why he sat for many years on the governing body of the Walkley Awards as it gave out gong after gong to ABC programs like Four Corners, Lateline, Foreign Correspondent and Australian Story, and to ABC Current Affairs, which excavate the news and tell us not only who, what, when, where and how, but why. Now, I enjoy a lot of commercial television, especially local and foreign drama, and I'm very glad that A Place to Call Home is coming back. But the demands of the market and the shareholders limit the capacity of commercial news. And that's not an insult, it's simply an acknowledgement. And Mr. Meakin told the Herald a couple of years ago, quote, "When you look at the 6 p.m. bulletin on its own, you get locally prioritised news, national news, international news, weather and sport in 22 minutes. Now, I'll leave you with this question. As efficient as that formula undoubtedly is it enough? And I hope that's what we will be debating tonight. Thank you.